And now it's recording. It says it's starting to record. Perfect. Alrighty. This is Thelma Alanis interviewing Dennis Borel for the UT Arlington, Texas Disability History Oral History Project. Today's date is April 11, 2022, and I am conducting this interview through Microsoft Teams. I am here today to talk with Dennis Borel about his experience advocating for positive change in government policies through various issues surrounding people with disabilities. Dennis, thank you for participating in the university's Oral History program.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Um, I guess before anything, let's just start from the beginning. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history?
Yeah, sure. I would say that I think I have a background that's somewhat suited to this kind of work, to be disability advocacy. I spent most of my adult life doing something with disadvantaged populations, and that goes back to even being a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco for a couple of years, which was obviously a very disadvantaged population there. And subsequently, I was a high school teacher in the United States. As I moved into more of this advocacy type role, I ended up, working in advocacy for small community volunteer fire departments, of all things. And spent 10 years doing pretty much street level social work, running a school for dropouts, at-risk youth, and then subsequently for moving into this role with the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities in 2000, in year 2000. So I've now been doing this for some time.
And can you tell us a little bit about your childhood? Did you know this is what you wanted to do your whole life, or was there something that inspired you to do that?
That's an interesting question. No, I had no idea. So I grew up I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, in a working class neighborhood there. I'm a first generation American. I'm proud of that. So, I was, fortunate enough to have a, stable home life. I thought Detroit was a good place to grow up in, which is kind of funny because now people look at me strangely when I say that, but I thought it was. I still think it was. So I think I had a fairly normal childhood. I have a brother and all that, and I mean there were some things that were different. Like my parents, the first time they ever entered a classroom where English was spoken is when they visited their son's school in Detroit. So they didn't even speak English until learning it as immigrants in the United States. Um, public schools. Eventually ended up graduating from the University of Michigan. Went through a few different universities, and yeah, that's my childhood and young adulthood.
That's perfect. So what was it that eventually, I guess, made you transition here to Texas? I see that you started in Detroit, and your family, your first generation. What helped you transition here to Texas?
Looking for economic opportunity, frankly. As I mentioned, I did grow up young adulthood in Michigan. I served, serving in the Peace Corps, which was kind of a spur of the moment decision, a flyer, if you will. So there's actually an interesting little fact about that. The person who recruited me to join the Peace Corps was named Alice Cooper, the same as the outrageous rock star, who's also from Detroit, by the way. But it wasn't that Alice Cooper that recruited me. But so serving in the Peace Corps, I had actually gone to business school at the University of Michigan, and the Peace Corps became a teacher in Morocco. And so working like that, working with incredibly disadvantaged young people, kind of changed my perspectives as to what the haves are and what the have-nots are. And so after that, I've always been drawn. I came back. I the United States. I became a teacher and left for Texas to, again, pursue some opportunity at the time, found it, and have been here since.
Do you mind expanding more on your experience in Morocco?
Sure. Sure. My job there was I was working in a vocational high school, public vocational high school in Morocco. I was teaching a program where the idea is that they were supposed to leave the school with a marketable job skill. And my students were learning accounting and, sort of that kind of stuff, business math. There was literally nothing to work with. There were no books. Even the desks were pretty bad shape. Electricity was rare. Certainly, obviously, no computers or anything like that. It was strictly chalkboard kind of thing. All my students were male. It was a culture that didn't open many opportunities to young women. None of my students spoke English. That made it interesting. And so I had to teach my courses in French. Fortunately, that is the language I heard growing up, although I would say I didn't become too proficient until I started having to use it every day and explain things in French. So it was, it was a formative experience. I think it went well. The job was amazing. Living in a foreign culture is incredibly broadening, and being perceived as, obviously you stick out, like you really do stick out when you're in a country where it's about 1% Anglo. So yeah, you learn a lot of life lessons, gave me an opportunity to do other kinds of travel, mostly up to Europe, because Morocco was essentially engaged in a war at that time with, to the east, Algeria, in which bled over to the south in the Sahara. So it was the only way to travel was to go north, which was great because it was like Spain and stuff like that in Europe. So yeah, that was very broadening. So when I came back, I changed let's just say my professional idea of what might be a good thing to do changed dramatically there. And as I said, I started becoming I was a high school teacher in the United States then.
Yeah, I can definitely see. How can that change your perspective? I see here that it says that you are frequently called on for research, policy analysis as well, and recommendation for a lot of things surrounding disabilities. You have served. It says, as an advocate for positive change in government policies and practice in employment, transportation, housing, healthcare, architectural barriers to promote and full inclusion for people with disability in community life. Can you elaborate on that, your experience doing all of that?
Sure. So how this works and the type of model we hear. So the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities is a nonprofit organization. It's actually formed by people with disabilities. My board has to be majority people with disabilities, and it is, always has been. And our goal is basically to change the rules, change the regulations. And here's how I look at this thing. Our business is that people with disabilities can have access. And if I could boil it down into one word, everything you described, that one word is access. It's access to the built environment. It's access to education, to employment, to healthcare, to attendance services, to transportation, to recreation, to friendships, to a truly inclusive society. That one word, access, covers all those things. So do we have access in our society? Well, it's gotten better. It's gotten better. But I would remind you that until 1990, with the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, by a Texas president, by the way, oddly enough, it was perfectly legal to discriminate against people because of their disability. Until then, okay, what is that? That's 32 years ago? Until 32 years ago, discrimination was illegal in the United States, and it still exists broadly. And if you doubt that, ask people who were covered in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was much, much earlier, and they will tell you they're still discriminated against. So that happens today. So we have these issues. We want people to have access, people with disabilities to have access. So the system doesn't allow it. You can do two things. And this would apply to any kind of social kind of advocacy, or frankly, any advocacy. Any advocacy. If you can't do things the way you think are best, and you're the person doing it, you're the person who's covered by these regulations, you can do one or two things. You can abandon doing what you think is best, or you can change the rules to what you think is best. And that's what we do, is we change the rules. We do that through legislative advocacy, primarily, in the Texas legislature. And we do it with the state agencies, and we do some on the federal level as well, and sometimes on the local level, and sometimes we do public awareness things to change the hearts and minds of the general public about people with disabilities.
Can you share some of, I guess, experiences that you've had where you were able to make a difference through your program?
Sure. I mean, there's so many. A lot of our focus has been around supporting people with disabilities to live in the community, people with more significant disabilities. These are individuals who need a little help with what we call activities of daily living. And that can be everything from just making sure they have a safe environment to live in, appropriate medications, to if you're a person who's paralyzed from the neck down for a spinal cord injury, everything from getting out of bed, showering, feeding, everything. But all people, I'm convinced of this, all people with disabilities, no matter the level of disabilities, can live successfully in the community. And I personally know people who do that. So how do we make that happen? Well, we support like attendant care programs, Medicaid, okay, public health. That's public health to support these individuals, have somebody come to their home and help them with these tasks. Again, maybe it's relatively minor. Maybe they just need help with, as I say, a clean, safe environment, laundry, food prep, medications in order, that kind of thing, all the way to incredibly personal care. So we worked a lot on that, and we've made a fair amount of progress. That's our biggest issue right now. Other big issues have to do with the fact that many people with disabilities in Texas are on a waiting list to get services. In other words, we don't serve all the people who need it. And not only that, we're the worst in the country when it comes to serving all the people who need services. We rank at the bottom. We have the longest and largest wait list for what we call the Medicaid waiver program in the United States. Give you an example. Okay, so Thelma, people who are on the wait list now, who are now getting services, have put their names on that wait list 17 years ago. 17 years ago. It's not a lot worse. Somebody putting their name on the wait list today, at the rate they're beginning to serve people, would be on that wait list for 30, 40, or more years. So we do think we were fighting unconscionable actions. This, in a generally considered one of the richest states in the richest country in the history of the world. Okay, so we have a lot of misplaced priorities to work on. So we work on a lot of those things. We work on stuff like access to education, okay, for kids with disabilities, special education. We fought those rules. We're fighting voting rights. Voting has been made more difficult by recent laws by the Texas legislature. And if you saw the news recently, you saw that the number of mail-in ballots that were rejected in this last election, last month, was 13 times what it was before. 13 times worse. And who are mail-in ballots for? Why? People with disabilities and older adults primarily. Very small percentage are for people who will be out of their home country that day, okay, or for a couple of weeks, so they can't do it. But it's primarily people with disabilities and older adults. And most of those older adults that do it are because they have disabilities themselves. So we have suppressed the vote of people with disabilities. And we fought hard last year on these. And we blocked many of the worst things they wanted to do that would further suppress the vote, but they still succeeded. Okay? So voting rights is a big issue. Even things like access to medications. We work a lot in that area. Obviously people with disabilities are overusers of prescription drugs and prescription medicines and medical cannabis. We work in all those areas to get further access to those kinds of treatments. Why? Well, we want to have an inclusive society. If you have chronic illness or a permanent disability, it does not mean you cannot be healthy enough to be part of our community. And I know this because some of those people work in our small nonprofit here, and I know many others that are out there in the community doing all kinds of amazing things. So that's a self-directed life. That's what we want all people to have. If you have a chronic illness or a permanent disability, you just accommodate for that. So I mean, there's so many things, and I'll give you one we achieved last year. In Texas Medicaid, most of the adults with disabilities in Texas Medicaid didn't have a dental plan. So in their entire adult lifetime, they had no access to a dentist. You know what that does to you, apart from the fact that your teeth rot? It messes up with your nutrition. It causes heart disease. It causes diabetes. It causes cancer. It causes hypertension. All this we know. If you're in a public health program, who pays for that heart disease, diabetes, hypertension effects? Why the same program that denies them access to the dental benefit that would prevent that? So we actually finally, I worked 3 sessions and this finally was able to pass a bill that this dental benefit will be available. So an adult with a disability, really less than 10% could see a dentist before. Now they all will. They'll get to see a dentist once a year versus 0 times in their adult lifetime. That was a big win. It was a big health win. And in our society, I noticed you have a very nice smile. I noticed that right away when we see, there it is. This is part of our culture is good oral health and a good oral health appearance, is it not? And I always like to tell those guys is, a girl's not going to kiss you if half your teeth are missing. But and I say things like that because we have to have some fun with the work we do. Otherwise, it would be depressing. So all those things are examples, but public awareness is another thing. So, public awareness is not necessarily changing policy, but it can lead to changing policy. So we do things like we have a disability film festival every year, and that's a whole lot of fun. And we have a competition, a short film competition. Last year we got over 100 entries from over 25 different countries of the world. Our little nonprofit now has an international disability film festival, and this will be our 19th year of doing it. We've also had some high-profile events. We actually organized the Team Everest expedition in 2003, which ended up making world mountaineering history. It's the largest cross-disability team to ever make it to Everest Base Camp at an elevation 2,000 feet higher than the tallest mountain in the Rockies. And then when our expedition leader became the first person with an arm amputation to ever summit Mount Everest. And there is a documentary film, I think you can see it on Amazon, called Team Everest, A Himalayan Journey, all about that. What that did is that raised a tremendous amount of profile. And you know why? I could take this group of people with disabilities who went to Nepal and Everest, and I could put them on the corner in Arlington or in Austin here. And they could be saying stuff like, it's important that we have an inclusive society. Nobody would pay any attention to it. Took those same people and put them on Mount Everest. The world paid attention to them. That was public awareness. So, these are the kinds of things we do. We also do some consulting, from like folks that want to have an accessible website. Let's make sure. So it's one thing that they follow the technology rules that it be accessible, but it has to be usable too. That's not part of the technology regs. So we'll test it with real people with disabilities. We'll test voting machines using real people with disabilities, voting with them. We'll take people into businesses to make sure that those businesses are truly accessible. We do all these kinds of things. So it's a multi-pronged approach.
It looks like it's very so the nonprofit organization that you work for, I'm assuming it has a lot of different sections, right? Where because you're mentioning how y'all were able to get to have bills to pass as well, and then you also have counseling sections. So do you have a variety of different people that specialize in different fields as well that all help y'all?
Yeah. I think it's a pretty unusual place. Our entire staff is 12 people. That's it.
Hi.
So we have yes. So we have people who do work pretty much all the time in advocacy. I work probably about half my time in advocacy, but I have others that do it. We have about 5 people that have our program called Consumer Directed Services, where they support about 300 individuals in the community. So we do some direct service in that area. Then we have a communications person, and we have the Film Fest director, who, by the way, is legally blind. I mean, how cool is that? And if it comes to consulting, our consulting things we just absorb. So, okay, what's our consulting going to be? Oh, it's going to be a website. These people want us to look at a website. Well, I'll get that guy, the Film Fest director who's legally blind. He's really good at figuring out whether a website is truly usable. So I'll have him do that. Or I'll have other folks work on whatever, or we'll call some of our members and say, how'd you like to come in and do a focus group? We'll give you $100. Come on in, and we'll record that. And by the way, there'll be some voting machines there, and you'll get to try and use them and give your feedback. So our staff is small, but we have a lot of diverse skills in here. So William, the Film Fest director, is a person with a disability. My deputy executive director has quadriplegia. Our communication specialist has quadriplegia. Our advocacy director is a parent of a child with a disability. Our chief operating officer is a parent of a child with a disability. You get it. There are people with disabilities working here. Our new advocacy fellow is a person with a disability. Our existing advocacy fellow is a person with a disability. So we walk our talk, and I think that proves something. Okay, it's pretty darn hard to run a nonprofit organization in Texas. It really is, especially one that's advocacy based. Not a lot of grants for advocacy, especially one that represents the lowest income demographic group in our society, which are people with disabilities. They don't really have a lot of means to support us. So this is a hard organization to keep the doors open, the lights on, to keep functioning in the work we need to do. And we're doing it with a staff that reflects the values that we bring to our advocacy. So we are demonstrating that, that people with disabilities can not only pull their own weight, but excel in an inclusive, functioning society.
Absolutely. And it's so impressive. You're 13 members, and look at everything you're able to accomplish. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. I think we're pretty smart about it. Frankly, some of the things are a bit lucky. Like that disability film festival. It's called Cinema Touching Disability. You can look it up on the web. I was the same guy, William. The same guy's been running it for 19 years. He was just like, had a little part-time gig with us, and one time he says to me, we ought to do a disability film festival. I said, I ain't got the time for it. If you want to do it, you do it. And we thought, well, we'll try it. And the first one worked, and then it's kind of worked ever since. So that was, you know, we're not afraid to try things. Our advocacy is, you know, we're not afraid to bring in some of our members who have a lived experience. Very important, lived experience. They have lived experience with dealing with unreliable attendant care, which has resulted in them having a decline in their health, which has resulted with them being in the hospital. And you know what? Instead of paying an inexpensive community attendant program, we're paying for somebody's surgery. Same source of dollars, taxpayers, you know. So how, you know, so we make smart arguments that are based on logic, humanitarian benefit, but also they're fiscally smart, you know. It's much better to educate a child with a disability effectively so they can succeed in further educational endeavors, so they can join the workforce, so they can become independent, so they don't have to rely on Medicaid for their needs into the future. Isn't that smart?
Absolutely.
So why is it so hard to get our policymakers to do that?
I don't know. I wish.
That's the question you should add. Maybe that's the title of your interview. Why is it so hard to get policymakers not only to do the right thing, but to do smart public policy?
If only we can reiterate that more.
Yeah.
I did see that you had, it says your service and advisory groups included an appointment by Governor Rick Perry to the State Independent Living Council. Can you elaborate on that experience as well?
Yeah, sure. I would say that let's expand it, okay? Because I've served on a lot. I cited that one because it was a governor's appointment. And okay, so I'm a guy who runs a small nonprofit disability advocacy organization. Yet I knew Governor Rick Perry, okay? I knew Governor Perry. And he would meet with us. Not so much the case with the current governor, by the way. So the State Independent Living Council is a board that, you know, this is federally mandated, and it talks about independent living. So, you know, I was a good fit. Perry appointed me. I served on it for 8 years, and we developed policy to have like the support centers for independent living around the state, where there are 28 right now, support people to live independently. It says Center for Independent Living. They're not residential. It's to support people who live in their own communities with maybe some independent living services, you know, troubleshooting for them, personal advocacy on an individual, helping someone get an attendant, helping someone get housing, all those kinds of things, skills building, everything. So that's what that was about. But I've been on many others. I've been appointed by the Executive Commissioner of the Health and Human Services Commission, and those have been many over the years. And I do many of those, and one of my favorites was the Promoting Independence Advisory Council, driven by the Olmstead decision in 1999, which said it was discrimination if you didn't support people with disabilities to live in the most integrated setting, which means institutions are not the most integrated setting. Institutions like nursing homes, state-supported living centers, large intermediate care facilities, those are congregate, separate settings where people with disabilities are warehoused, okay? And older folks, okay? I'm not saying that there's absolutely no need for any of these, but that's what we relied on in our country for many, many years. Those large institutions, like Texas has more large state-run institutions than any other state, with more people in it than any other state. Okay. Those arose in the United States in the 50s, the 1850s, the 1850s. That was not an era of great civil rights, to say the least. And yet we still have these large institutions out there. So I served on that board and tried to, develop policies and recommendations for the state to move to more integrated settings. The one I enjoy, there's several I'm on right now, but one I like right now that has been very enjoyable is the Drug Utilization Review Board. And this is a good example of advocacy, Thelma. So that's an appointment from the Executive Commissioner of the Health and Human Services Commission. So what does the Drug Utilization Review Board do? It sets the preferred drug list for the Medicaid program, all right? The Medicaid program, which means we decide which drugs can be easily gotten through Medicaid and which you can still get them. You have to jump through hoops and there's barriers. So what happens is the preferred drug list is what people get, all right? So when I first found about this board, I went to a public meeting on it because I was going to talk about a certain drug that was going to help people control seizures, people with epilepsy. And I went there, and everybody on that board, everybody was a clinician, everybody. They were either pharmacists or they were doctors. And everybody in the room was either a pharmacist, a doctor in the audience, or a drug company lobbyist. Okay? I was the only person. There must have been, 12, 13 people on this board, 40 people in the audience, and I was the only person there who represented the interests of the intended beneficiaries of the Drug Utilization Review Board. And I said, this, so I got interested and I started advocating, so why did I go there the first time? My friends at the Epilepsy Foundation, which are linked to us, called me up and said, look, this drug is effective. It's not going to be on the preferred drug list. And I went there and argued the case, and it remained on the preferred drug list. It was successful. And I started doing that more and more. Then I started still getting to the point, like, why are there nobody representing these intended beneficiaries? So I was able to basically get language in a piece of legislation to create a seat on that board for someone to represent Medicaid beneficiaries. Okay, that bill passed, and then I got the Health and Human Services Commissioner to appoint me to fill that role. And and you know what? I got to tell you, when I went in there, I'm going like, okay, these people are clinicians. I know the people. They know the science, the medicine, the clinicians, and I thought that they might see me as not very qualified, but actually they were very welcoming. And from day one, I've now been on it 6 years or something, and they've been very welcoming. They always tell me, keep asking your questions because you ask questions and nobody else asks. So, okay. So and I can tell you that there's been a number of times where that has influenced which drugs are available to people on Medicaid. And again, why is that important? Remember back to my comment about access to medicines. If you have a chronic illness or a permanent disability and there's effective medication, it can allow you to live a far more self-driven, integrated life. So that's why that's important.
Honestly, I didn't even know that process even happened. And it's bizarre that you're telling me how, usually there isn't anybody there to represent the people.
Right.
That is so crazy.
Yeah, I thought so. But, but don't blame yourself, Thelma, because I didn't know about it till, like I said, my friends at the Epilepsy, we're connected to about 100 different disability organizations and are primarily, get our input from them, and then we go and advocate on these issues. So until they brought that to my attention, I didn't know it. And frankly, I don't know a lot about epilepsy. I really don't. But I know where to go to find people who do know a lot about epilepsy, or who know a lot about intellectual disability, or Down syndrome, or spinal cord injury, or autism. I know veterans to speak to about PTSD, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm not. I do advocacy work, and I'm good at it, and so are my colleagues. But oftentimes we rely on people that we're connected to give us the precise information we need to advocate for. That's why, collaborating in this world is so important in the advocacy world for people with disabilities. And I'm familiar with UT Arlington. I've been up there and done some presentations, and I've toured and it's like, y'all are hands down a university that is at the forefront of disability issues and studies in Texas. And I notice you're very flat, so it's kind of easy to get around, for people in wheelchairs. But I'm very aware of who you guys are, and when you reached out, I didn't know you personally, but I know Dr. Rose, and I know some of those others. And I knew Dr. Ackery, who I think retired last year, and I know John Dicus, who founded this thing up there 25 or 30 years ago. He's been down to the Capitol to testify on bills. He's very effective.
I'm glad you know Dr. Rose as well. I met her this semester. Hello? Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit as well about your experience on the STAR Plus pilot program planning workshop as well?
Oh yeah. Again, this parallels the Drug Utilization Review Board. Okay, the STAR Plus Program Planning Committee, which is established in law and is put into it is housed in the Health and Human Services Commission. Again, that was one of the things I advocated on that bill that created that committee. But also the bill had a larger purpose. The bill had a larger purpose to basically to look at moving some of what we call the IDD waivers into the STAR Plus or managed care program. Managed care in Medicaid provides about 90 to 95% of all services. So the outliers are these IDD waivers that are still run by the state. By the way, the state ranks, I believe, 49th in the country in effective IDD waivers. So what are we defending by saying that that's a good plan? But let's try it out. So we said we should do this. The actual roots of this go back years before then, when there was a legislative initiative to do it. They never did it. So they came back and said, you know what, let's do it, but let's do a pilot program that has to be successful before we actually do it. And that pilot program will be run in the managed care environment. And we're in the process of having our meetings and designing it, and we've designed it. And so it's going to take place in the San Antonio catchment area. And they're going to they have an RFP out for people to, these managed care organizations to do it. There's a lot of work going into it, what it'll look like. I think they're looking at a pilot of maybe 3,000 people. Also in that bill was to do a pilot on one of my favorite subjects, dental care. Remember in 2021, I got this once a year dental visit. 2019 is when that pilot bill passed. And I didn't get anything, but in the pilot bill, it says, we'll try a pilot on dental. And they're going to try, or what they decided to do is to try a pilot on comprehensive dental. In other words, don't let them just go to a dentist once a year and fix a cavity, although, believe it or not, fixing a cavity is the best dental care in the entire world. But give them more because, give them more comprehensive. So we're looking at doing a pilot in that. So those two pilots, those are, I think, can happen in starting next year. So, and if those are successful, the idea is to maybe transition these IDD waivers with some more dental benefits into the larger Medicaid program. So, these kinds of things are important. And so when I look at that committee right now, there are people from managed care organizations. There are well-staffed by the health and, the state employees, the state agency personnel are there. And then there's people like myself, I particularly am advocating around dental type stuff. And there are other people who advocate around people with intellectual disabilities, people with related conditions. And, there's a couple of really interesting things in that committee that are You look at that and you go, okay, that sounds like a pretty standard thing, but there are two key elements in there that are showing direction. One is this. It's not just what they call IDD, not just intellectual and developmental disabilities, but people that also have those same functional needs that are not IDD. So you might ask yourself, well, why, if they're the same functional needs, what's the difference? You're only IDD if the age of onset of your disability was before age 22. If the age of onset of your disability was after age 22, you're not IDD. And there are programs, these IDD waivers are pretty much set aside just for people whose age of onset was before age 22. That is nonsense. It should be functional need. My colleague, I mentioned my deputy executive director is quadriplegic. He broke his neck at 17 in a gymnastics accident. I know people who suffer spinal cord injuries in their late 20s, usually men. Young men are the risk takers that break their necks more often than not. They do it after age 22, they're not ID, and they can't get certain services. It's bullshit. This pilot is breaking down that barrier. That's important. Most people didn't pay a lot of attention. I did during that. The other thing I like about it is more consumer direction, where instead of being the passive recipient of services, the consumer has some control over their services. So those two things, consumer direction and functional assessment, functional needs assessment, are in that legislation that most people don't really see as critical, but I do. And I think people in the know really understand the difference, because this is breaking the mold a little bit. Okay, it's what we need to do.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. That is crazy. Oh my God. I can't reiterate how crazy all of this is, and I'm so glad that your program exists and it's doing everything that y'all are doing right now.
You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, catch some of our stuff.
I would definitely will be following you guys on that. On that note, I was going to ask, how do you guys go about promoting everything that you do as well? Do you guys? You just said you have an Instagram and a Twitter, right? Facebook as well.
Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and so we have an excellent communications director. And that was one of the things that, when we were smaller, one of the first positions I wanted to add on to communicate these things, and what's that? Barbara Jordan. By the way, we've won 6 Barbara Jordan Awards for effective media communications, and Barbara. Okay, let's see if I can do this. So Barbara Jordan was very unique and historic, and she had this really deep voice, and she would say, "It is important that the communicators communicate the reality of people with disabilities." And I've seen this video so many times I can do that. Barbara Jordan was a person with a disability. If you didn't know that, she was. So yes, we use those. Social media has been very helpful. Obviously, it's a big state. I know there's people outside Texas that follow us, but we're primarily followed by people in Texas. So we do that. Social media, we do that. We do have an e-newsletter, but I'll tell you, it's clear, and we do that, but it's clear that is somewhat of a fading communication tool. We have a website, of course, that we do our best to maintain, and that seems to get a lot of visits. We also have been doing a series of virtual roundtables now for, we'd actually done an occasional one, but with the onset of the pandemic, where we would do these things. In fact, we did one at UT Arlington. We did our in-person roundtable at UT Arlington, for example, before the pandemic, and it was really cool. It was very successful. With the pandemic, we switched and pivoted. We pivoted. Let's do this virtually. We'll do it through Zoom. What the hell is Zoom? I didn't know how to use it. Nobody knew how to use it. Well, I know. I think we all know how to use it pretty well right now. It's better than Microsoft Teams, by the way, for anything more than a few people. So we've done a series of those. We call them Raise Your Voice, and we do on certain topics, and they're very interactive. and we know how to do this. Our communications director is trained in liberating structures, which is a facilitation technique to make sure people don't hide in the back of the, like in my high school days with students in the back of the room. Stop sleeping back there. You can't. So we do these things that are more engaging, and we do them regularly. We probably did 15 last year or something. That was a legislative year. We'll do a little bit less this year. So that has proven to be good. So basically, this is classic. Small nonprofit organization, not a lot of budget, but we've been able to use technology tools to reach a lot more people. That's how we've been doing it.
I love it. What advice, I guess, you would have for someone that might want to follow your footsteps and, fabricating?
First of all, you should find an organization. Now, it doesn't have to be ours. It doesn't have to be the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities. It can be one of the others. Find one, get involved, because these are topics and subjects that don't often reach mainstream media. In fact, people with disabilities, though the largest minority group in the United States, are seldom recognized as such. So get involved with an advocacy group. The second thing I would say is, maybe do a little soul searching, as I did as a young adult in a critical time in my life and change. So we're all going to spend a lot of time working. Okay? I mean, there are things we can do. I live in Austin. I see these big state agency buildings, these big office towers. And you know what I think? God, I'd die in those places. So, if you want to have a life of meaningful work that's endlessly interesting, endlessly diverse, such that you might be speaking with the parent of a child with Down syndrome in the morning, trying to help them find something they need, and in the afternoon you're talking to a state senator about why this bill needs to pass. If that's something that you think is meaningful, that's what you need to do. Will you maybe be as financially successful as if you'd gone to work in those office buildings or agency buildings? Probably not. But but you can make a living at it, as I've proved. But those I would say is, first of all, do it because you want to do something like that, and then find an advocacy organization to get affiliated with.
Is there any subject or anything that you would like to cover that you might feel that we didn't get to cover today?
I mean, that's good. I mean, there's so many things. We are not what I am seeing today. Okay, 2022. This is April the 11th, 2022. There seems to be a trend to go against the full involvement of all people in our society, to restrict the voting access stuff has, in my opinion, turned into suppression. Issues surrounding kids with disabilities are underaddressed. That waiting list, if you're looking at putting your name on a waiting list and having to wait 40 years, wasn't always, in other words, we have backslid in a lot of areas when it comes to full inclusion of all people. I'm not just talking about people with disabilities. That is unsustainable. That is not sustainable. A truly sustainable culture involves all their citizens, all of them. And we're instead trying to, I don't know what, prevent, if you will, prevent inclusion of all people. And people with disabilities know this. And there are some issues that we don't get involved in because they deal with other subgroups that are suffering discrimination out. Why? Well, because we only have so much bandwidth and we're focusing on disability issues, but a lot of my people are aware of it. As a population that has suffered discrimination, when they see discriminating acts against other groups, they're upset about it. And they know that that's going to bleed over into them. So that's why we're we don't, again, have the bandwidth, but we support a fully inclusive society for all.
I completely agree on that.
Okay. I just want to let you know I have a hard stop in like 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, it's okay. I was just going to thank you for this amazing interview. I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.